Arizona Territory, 1879. The sun was setting behind the red cliffs when she pulled a revolver on him. "Step down from the wagon," she said, voice low, hands steady. "I do not want to shoot you, but I will." The man holding the reins blinked against the sun, then slowly raised both hands. "All right," he said, "but if you are going to rob me, you should at least know my name." She frowned. "I do not care what your name is." "You will," he said, stepping down from the buckboard with calm that made her uneasy. "Name's Elias Thorne." She cocked the hammer. "Back away." He did, slowly, boots crunching dry gravel. The mare hitched to the wagon, pawed the dirt, and snorted. Elias kept his hands up and his voice easy. "You alone, none of your business." He glanced past her, eyes sharp. "You do not look like a thief." She gritted her teeth. "And you talk too much for a man with a gun pointed at him." He looked at her, really looked this time. Not at the revolver, but at her eyes, the mud-stained hem of her skirt, the threadbare shawl, the way her shoulders were squared like she had nothing left to lose. "Whatever you think I have," he said gently, "there is not much of it." She climbed onto the wagon seat, tugging the reins. "I will take my chances." Then she paused, eyes darting toward the crate behind the bench. She shoved it open. Flour, dried apples, a small sack of coins. She grabbed them all. "You forgot one thing," he said, brushing dust from his coat. She turned, gun still trained on him. "What?" Elias smiled, not mocking, not angry, just quiet. "My last name." She stared at him, confused. "What? If you are going to steal my wagon, you might as well take my last name too." She blinked. "What the hell does that mean?" "It means," Elias said, stepping closer, "you do not want to rob me. You want help, and I am offering it." Her jaw clenched. She backed away, but her knees buckled. She dropped the revolver and slid off the bench, landing hard on the ground. Elias was beside her in a second, catching her before she hit face first. "I have not eaten in 2 days," she muttered. "I figured," he said. She tried to push him off, but her arms were too weak. "Leave me alone." "I will not," Elias said, wrapping his coat around her shoulders. "What is your name?" She hesitated. "Julietta James," he nodded. "All right, Julietta James. Let's get you some water." He lifted her gently onto the wagon bench, then took the reins and turned the horses east, back toward his camp. She woke to the smell of beans and bacon. The fire cracked nearby, and Elias sat across it, stirring a tin pot. The wagon stood yards away, untouched, the mare grazing behind it. Julietta sat up slowly, dazed. "You are safe," he said, not looking at her. She glanced down. His coat still covered her. She shrugged it off, standing. "Why did you not take me to the sheriff?" "Because you do not belong in a jail. You belong somewhere safe," she scoffed. "You do not know anything about me." "I know enough. You are hungry, you are desperate, and you are not a killer." Silence stretched between them. "I have 2 children," she whispered. "Back in Prescott." Elias nodded, still stirring. "How old?" 7 and 5, Della and Drew. He looked up then, eyes steady. "Where are they now?" "Left with a woman I thought I could trust," Julietta said, voice breaking. "When I came back, they were gone. She sold them off as labor, said she needed the money." Elias stood, crossed to her, and handed her a tin plate. "You are going to get them back." She took the food with shaking hands. "How? I have horses, a wagon, I know folks from here to Tombstone." "You help me run my goods through the territory, I help you find your children." Julietta stared at him. "Why would you do that for me?" "Because I believe in giving people a second chance, and because you tried to rob me instead of begging." A pause. "That takes grit." She swallowed hard. "You are either the kindest man I have ever met or the dumbest." Elias smiled again. "Maybe both." They rode together the next morning under a pale blue sky. Julietta sat beside Elias on the bench, holding a folded map he had drawn from memory, each town marked in careful script. "You know all these places?" she asked. lived here most my life. And what do you haul? Mostly dry goods, sometimes tools, sometimes whiskey if the law is looking the other way. She glanced at him. You sure you want someone like me riding beside you? I would not have it any other way. Days passed in quiet rhythm. At night they camped near creeks or under cottonwoods. Elias never pushed, never asked questions she was not ready to answer. He gave her space, but also steadiness. One night as she washed dishes in the creek, she caught him watching her. She turned, wiping her hands. What? He shook his head, smiling softly. Nothing, just glad you are here. Julieta looked away, heart pounding. She was not used to kindness, not from men. They had taken, used, left. But Elias was different. He listened. He noticed. He made her feel seen. That night she lay awake in her bedroll, listening to the sound of his breathing across the fire. For the first time in years she did not feel alone. By the 6th day they reached Mescal. A boy at the trading post tipped them off 2 children matching her description had been seen weeks ago, sold to a rancher outside town. Julieta's hands shook as she gripped the wagon's edge. Do you think it is them? Elias looked at her gently. Only one way to find out. They rode hard. The ranch sat in a valley rimmed with mesquite and dust. A tall man stepped out when they pulled up. Elias swung down first, hand near his holster. Julieta climbed down after. We are looking for 2 children, she said. Brown hair, girl named Della, boy named Drew. The rancher frowned. Bought a pair like that, real quiet, good workers. Elias stepped forward. We will pay you double what you gave for them. The man's eyes narrowed. They yours, they are hers, Elias said, and you are going to give them back. The man looked at Julieta, then at Elias. He saw the way Elias stood in front of her, the way she gripped his arm. Take them, he muttered. I did not want them anyway. Julieta ran toward the shed. The door creaked open and there they were, crouched on a pile of hay, eyes wide. Della, Julieta whispered. The girl stood slowly. Mama! Julieta fell to her knees, pulling them both into her arms, sobbing. Elias stood back, watching. When she turned, cheeks wet, children clinging to her. She met his gaze for a long, quiet moment. Thank you, she whispered. That night the children curled up in the wagon bed, fast asleep. Julieta sat by the fire, staring into the flames. Elias sat beside her, close but not too close. You meant what you said, she murmured. I do not say what I do not mean. She turned to him. You have been kind, Elias. More than I deserve. You deserve more than you have ever been given, he said. And if you let me, I would like to give you more. Her breath caught. You forgot something, he said softly. She blinked. What? When you robbed my wagon, he said, a half smile on his lips. You forgot one thing. She stared at him. He leaned in, just enough for her to feel the warmth of him. My last name. Julieta's lips parted. I want you, Julieta James, he said, and I want those children too. If you will have me. Tears welled in her eyes. I will, she whispered, voice shaking. I will. Elias rose before first light, the chill still clinging to the mesquite shadows. He kept his movements quiet, feeding the coals, setting a pot to boil. The children were still bundled in the wagon bed, and Julieta hadn't stirred. He let her sleep. She hadn't had rest like that in who knew how long. Behind him, the wind tugged gently at the canvas tarp. He reached underneath and pulled out a folded shirt, one of his better ones, faded blue with a few stubborn patches. He laid it beside her shawl on the wagon seat, then returned to the fire. When she finally sat up, she didn't speak right away. She watched him pour coffee, her hair loose from its braid, face bare of whatever defenses she'd carried that first night. She climbed down carefully, glancing once at the children before settling on the log across from him. I didn't expect to sleep like that, she said. You needed it, she nodded once. Della talks in her sleep, always has. Drew grinds his teeth. I noticed, he said, and she smiled faintly. She took the tin cup he offered and sipped. Then, after a long pause, you ever had children? No, he said. Wanted them once. Life turned sideways before it could happen. Her gaze lingered on his face. You lose someone, he nodded. Anna, years back, fever took her before winter. Julieta looked down. She was strong, he said. Would have liked you. The fire gave a soft pop. Della stirred in the wagon, then settled again. Julieta pulled the shawl tighter and looked toward the foothills. I don't know where to go now. Prescott burned me. Can't head north without passing through Yavapai land, and I won't risk that with the children. Elias nodded. There's a place near Sonwita. Old homestead my cousin left behind. Roof needs fixing, but the well's clean. It's yours if you want it. She didn't answer right away. You trust me that much? She finally asked. I do. Why? He looked at her then, steady and sure. Because you've done everything hard without help, and because I want to build something that lasts, with you if you'll let me. Julieta set the cup down gently. You're not what I expected. I know, he said. Neither are you. They broke camp slowly, letting the sun warm the earth before hitching the mare. Della helped fold blankets, and Drew carried the skillet with both hands, his tongue poking out in concentration. Julieta watched them with quiet pride. As Elias cinched the harness, she came up beside him. You meant what you said about the homestead. I wouldn't have offered if I didn't. I want it, she said, but not just the land, he straightened. What else? Your name, she said. I want that too. His breath caught, but he didn't speak. Instead, he reached for her hand, rough palm curling around hers. They stood that way a while, the wind brushing past, the mare stamping once, impatient. Behind them, Della called for her mother. Julieta squeezed Elias's hand once, then turned toward her children. He watched her go, a quiet weight settling in his chest. Then he climbed up onto the wagon seat and waited. She came back moments later with both children, climbed up beside him, and settled Drew on her lap. Della leaned against Elias, small fingers curling around the edge of his coat. Ready? He asked. Julieta looked out at the road ahead. I'm ready, she said. The road to Sonwita wound through low grassland, broken now and then by clusters of ocotillo and the bones of old ranch fences. The wagon moved slow, the mare careful on the uneven stretch. Elias guided her with one hand. Julieta kept the children shaded under a canvas flap she'd pinned up with bits of twine and a bent spoon. Drew had found a pine cone and was quietly dismantling it. Della sat close to her mother's side, her thumb pressed to her lower lip. Elias glanced at the horizon. There's a dry creek bed up ahead. We should stop there for supper. Julieta nodded. I'd like to make biscuits. If you've still got that tin of lard. He reached under the seat and handed it to her. I was saving it, but I suppose this is a worthy cause. Della perked up. Mama makes the kind with the soft middles. Julieta brushed a hand through her daughter's hair. Only if the fire cooperates. They camped beneath a twisted ironwood, its roots sunk deep into the banks of the dry wash. Elias gathered mesquite branches and built the fire low, coaxing heat with a bit of pine pitch. Julieta knelt beside the Dutch oven, rolling dough with a bottle that once held vinegar. The children watched from a blanket, chewing on strips of jerky Elias had cut earlier. He sat down beside them, stretching his legs. You ever been this far south? Julieta shook her head. Never got past Florence before. I heard folks say the land down here's too dry to make anything grow. Depends on what you're planting. Cotton does better than most, so do beans. But you need to watch how you draw from the well or it'll turn brackish by August. She glanced at him. You sound like a man who's tried and failed. I am, he said, shifting to ease a knot in his back, and a man who tried again. Julieta turned the biscuits once, then sat back on her heels. You said that roof needs fixing. What else? 2 walls slant inward. Nothing dangerous, but it'll need bracing. There's a barn, mostly standing. One corner sank during last year's rains. Water nearby, spring not far. There's a pipe that runs down through the arroyo, might need clearing. She wiped her hands on her skirt. And you think we can manage all that? I do. You're already doing harder things. Della stood and came to sit between them, leaning against Elias's side without saying a word. He looked down at her, then at Julieta. I'll start repairs once we get there, he said. But I want your say in how it's done. I don't know anything about building. You know what a home needs. Julieta opened her mouth, then closed it again. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter. I want a door that closes right, no gaps. And a latch the children can work from the inside. He nodded. We'll make one. She turned the biscuits out onto a folded cloth, steam rising from the browned crusts. Drew clapped his hands and she handed him the smallest one. As they ate, the sun dipped behind the ridgeline, casting long gold shadows over the wash. Elias leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I was thinking, he said, once the roof's done, we could dig a garden plot. Keep it close to the house so the javelinas don't get bold. Julieta ran her fingers along the rim of her tin plate. We'd need fencing. I'll trade for wire in Patagonia. There's a smith there who owes me. Della looked up at her mother. Can we have a chicken? Julieta smiled. Maybe 2. But only if you help feed them. I will. Elias stood, collecting the plates. Then we'll need a coop. Nothing fancy. I've got some old boards stacked behind the barn. They cleaned up without hurry. The stars came out one by one and Drew fell asleep curled against his sister under the blanket. Julieta stayed near the fire, legs tucked beneath her. Elias settled across from her, rubbing the heel of his palm where a blister had split open earlier. She reached into the wagon and came back with a scrap of cloth and a small jar of salve. You don't have to, he said, but offered his hand anyway. She worked in silence, wrapping it neatly. He watched her face. You ever think about what comes after all this? She tied the knot and let his hand go. I try not to get ahead of myself. I do, he said. I think about you out there on that porch, watching the sun come up, Della chasing chickens, Drew dragging a stick through the dirt like it's a plow. And you, splinters under my nails, he said, voice low, dust in my boots. But the kind of tired that means something. She looked at him over the fire, eyes steady. Then we'd better make it last. The embers glowed between them, soft and warm. Neither moved to break the quiet. Then, without a word, she reached across and rested her hand over his. He didn't speak. Just turned his palm upward and laced his fingers through hers. The first time Julieta saw the cabin, the wind was carrying dust sideways and the air smelled of dry sage. The roof slanted unevenly and the door hung open on one hinge. Still, she stared at it like it was something sacred. Elias stepped down first, then offered her a hand. Drew clung to her skirt and Della tucked close behind. It's not much, Elias said, brushing grit from his sleeves, but it holds when the wind comes hard. Julieta stepped forward, the children following. The porch boards creaked but held. Inside, the single room was dim and still, thick with the scent of old wood and trapped heat. A rusted stove squatted in the corner, and a narrow cot leaned against the far wall. She crossed to the window and unlatched the shutter. Light spilled in across the floor, catching on floating dust. Della wandered over to a low shelf, touching a cracked mug left behind. Drew crouched to peer at a trail of ants along the wall. I'll sleep on the wagon until we clear space, Elias said from the doorway. Julieta turned. We'll need a second cot. The children can share. I'll build one. Got some pine stacked behind the barn. She nodded, then stepped outside again. The land unrolled quiet before her gold grass, scattered mesquite, the hint of distant hills. A hawk circled far overhead, riding the silence. "How deep's the well?" Elias walked to the pump handle, gave it a hard pull. It groaned, then spat a weak stream. 50 feet. Lining stone, not timber. She'll hold. Julieta knelt and ran her hand under the trickle. "Cool." He watched her a moment. "You've got a way of looking at things like they're speaking to you." "They usually are," she said. "You just have to listen close." That night they made a place for the children on thick quilts near the hearth. Elias hung a blanket across the corner for privacy and spread his bedroll outside under the lean-to. Julieta laid her own down near the children, but sleep didn't come. The sounds were different here, no wagon wheels or campfire crackle. Just the wind through the eaves and the occasional rustle of brush. She rose before dawn. The ground was cool beneath her bare feet, and the sky had just begun to pale. Elias was already awake, sawing a board across 2 sawhorses. She walked over, arms folded against the chill. "You always work before sunup," he didn't stop. "Helps me think." "What are you thinking now?" "That I'll need another 2 boards if we want the cot to last through winter." She tilted her head. "You planning that far ahead already?" "I am," he said, setting the saw aside. "I don't plan much," she said. "Not since things started falling apart." He wiped his hands on his trousers. "Then let's build something that won't." She studied him, not just his words, but the steadiness in the way he stood, the way he met her without reaching too far. She stepped closer. "My mother used to say a man's worth was in the way he fixed what was broken," she said. He looked down at the wood. "Then I hope she'd think well of me." "I think she would," Julieta said, then took the other end of the board. They worked through the morning. Della helped gather nails from a tin, and Drew handed up lengths of rope Elias used to brace the frame. By midday, the cot stood square and solid near the hearth, and the children tested it with soft giggles and bouncing feet. Julieta leaned against the doorframe, watching them. Elias came to stand beside her. He didn't speak, just rested his hand on the frame above her head, close but not touching. "I used to think I'd never have anything steady again," she said. "I stopped letting myself picture it." "I picture it all the time," he said quietly. "You here." The children growing, the years making this place better instead of harder. She turned to face him. "You really mean to stay?" "I meant it the moment I gave you my name." Her breath caught, but she held his gaze. "Then I'll stay too." His hand dropped to hers, fingers brushing. She didn't pull away. That night they sat outside while the children slept. The stars were sharp above them, and the land stretched quiet in every direction. Elias passed her a cup of warm chicory brew, and she accepted it without a word. "I never asked," he said after a while. "What did you dream of before all this?" She thought for a long moment. "A kitchen with a window, a place where no one ever knocks to take anything." He looked toward the dark shape of the house. "We'll put in a window." She smiled faintly. "And you?" "What did you dream of?" He turned to her, eyes soft. "Someone who'd stay when the wind came hard." She didn't answer, just leaned her shoulder against his, and together they watched the night settle around them like a promise kept. The rains came late that year, but when they did, they came soft and steady, soaking deep into the parched earth. Julieta stood barefoot in the doorway, watching the drops slide off the eaves into little puddles that gathered around the porch stones. Her skirts were damp at the hem from checking the coop 3 hens now, and one with a stubborn nesting habit. Della and Drew were inside, bent over a slate practicing numbers with bits of chalk Elias had bartered for in Patagonia. Elias was in the barn, hammering the last brace into place. The roof no longer leaned, and after weeks of work, the walls stood firm, straight as he could make them. He'd found an old horseshoe under the floorboards and hung it above the door. Julieta had said nothing at the time, but later that night, She touched it with her fingertips and whispered something under her breath. Inside the cabin, the new window Elias had cut into the east wall let in the gray light. Julietta wiped her hands on her apron and opened the stove door to check the cornbread. The scent of browned crust filled the room. Drew sneezed once, and Della shushed him with the quiet authority of a big sister. Julietta turned toward them. "You two remember to bring in kindling before supper," Drew nodded. "We stacked it by the door." "Good, thank you." Elias stepped in just then, wiping his boots on the mat he'd made from braided rope. His shirt clung to his shoulders from the barn's close air, and he ran a hand through his hair before crossing to the basin. "Roof's holding," he said. "Not a drop inside." Julietta handed him a towel. "It looks good. You did it right." He glanced at the children and lowered his voice. "You hear from the courier," she nodded, pulling a folded paper from the shelf. "Judge signed it. The adoption's legal now." Elias's hand paused on the towel. "All of it. Every line." He folded the towel carefully and set it aside. "Then they're mine too." Julietta nodded, her throat thick. "They've been yours from the start. This just made it known." The next morning they rode out together to the edge of the property. Elias had built a fence past the garden plot, and beyond it lay a grove of young mesquites. The children stayed behind with their new neighbor, a widow named Ruth who'd taken to Della like a second grandmother. Elias handed Julietta the reins to the mule hitched to the small plow. "You still feel up to it?" She narrowed her eyes at him. "You think I won't manage? I think you'll do better than I did." She walked the mule forward, the blade cutting a neat line into the damp earth. Elias followed beside her, adjusting the depth as she kept the rows straight. They worked until the sun crested overhead and the sweat darkened their backs, but by the end of the day the beans were in and the corn rows were laid. At supper, they sat outside to catch the breeze. Della had made a necklace from split mesquite pods, and Drew kept fiddling with a carved whistle Elias had shaped from a bit of cedar. Julietta rested her head against Elias's shoulder as the crickets started up in the grass. "I never thought I'd want to stay in one place," she said. "You don't have to go anywhere now. It's not just the land," she said. "It's what we made of it." He turned and kissed her temple, slow and certain. "What we're still making." That night, when the children were asleep and the lantern burned low, Julietta stood by the window and looked out at the dark. Elias came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "We'll plant tomatoes next," he said, voice low. She leaned back into him. "And cucumbers. We'll need to build a smokehouse too for the fall." "We will." He turned her gently, his hands resting at her hips. "This life," he said, "it feels like something we earned." "We did," she said. "Every splinter, every mile, every long night." Elias kissed her then, not hurried, not tentative. The kind of kiss that held a vow inside it, quiet and deep. When they pulled apart, she didn't look away. "You're sure?" he asked, though he already knew. She nodded. "I'm sure." They were married under the cottonwood that grew near the spring. Ruth stood witness, with both children holding baskets of wildflowers. The preacher came from Patagonia, his boots dusty and his collar askew, but his words were steady. Elias wore a clean shirt Julietta had stitched new buttons onto. She wore a faded blue dress with the hem let down. When the preacher asked if they'd take each other, Julietta answered before the man had finished the question. Elias didn't hesitate either. Della grinned, and Drew clutched a handful of petals he forgot to throw. Later, they danced to a fiddle played by Ruth's nephew, the children chasing fireflies in the grass. The sun dipped low and the stars came out one by one. They built a swing from a length of rope and hung it from the cottonwood. Della pushed Drew while Elias and Julietta sat on the porch steps, fingers laced. The house behind them stood solid, its windows glowing warm in the dusk, As spring turned to summer, the crops held. The hens laid regular and the children grew taller. Elias repaired the barn's loft, and Julietta started a small trade in preserves. The neighbors came and went, but the home remained steady. Each night after the lanterns dimmed, they lay beside each other, her breath slow against his collarbone, his hand resting at her waist. No more running, no more fear, just the soft rhythm of belonging and the quiet strength of a life built one day at a time together.